What does one say to an ancient Nephilim ghost?
I suppose you start with...
Talk to the hand.
Hello, my friend. Stay a while and listen.
What's going on YouTube? It's Filthy and we're back with another video. Diablo 3 Season 31 starts on the 12th of April. The theme is the Open Kanai's Cube, also known as the Forbidden Archives. Today we're going to talk through which classes get the most benefit, which class gets the least benefit, which builds get affected positively, and which ones don't really see much of an impact. I've had a lot of questions on that last video that I did about who are going to be the big winners and losers out of this season theme, because this season theme is an old one. It was way back in Season 17. The game's changed quite considerably with its itemization, and this is very much a wonky season theme. It affects some builds tremendously, and a lot of builds it doesn't really have any impact at all. I'm going to talk through a potential solution that Blizzard could implement. I don't expect them to do so in Season 31, but they certainly could consider it moving forwards. I'm going to timestamp this, so I'm going to do it class by class. If you just want to know on a particular class how is the cube being open going to impact it, by all means skip around as you want to. Other than that, a thumbs up brightens my day, and let's get going. So overall, the theme is quite wonky, and the reason the theme is quite wonky is because, first off, we're losing the soul shards, which were just brilliant across the board. Every class in the game 150 no problem, every suit build in the game 150 pretty much no problem. So we're losing a lot of power, so that always kind of feels a little bit bad. But the reason that this is not going to be a great season theme is because with the items that have been added to the game, so Orgild's set has got a big buff since the Forbidden Archives came in, the Crimson set got a big buff, Guardian set got a big buff, and pretty much any kind of set build is going to revolve around taking a Ring of Royal Grandeur and also either an Orgild set, Guardians, Crimsons, whatever. And from that basis, it means that one of these slots in the cube is generally going to be locked off, because jewellery often does carry modifiers. That's not the case for everything. The rogue can actually go on the character and you can open this up, but obviously some builds are structured so that they've got many modifiers that could benefit them. But the vast majority of builds in this game, there is generally one modifier on your character in the weapon slot, one in the cube, and then another modifier in the cube in the armor slot. It's just kind of how this game kind of works. Of course, some classes benefit more because there are more general modifiers, and some classes don't benefit at all because there aren't. So number one on the list for getting the biggest bonus is going to be the Necromancer. So Nova is one of the strongest builds in the game. It is quite fishy in terms of pushing, because you do have to save a pylon for the Rift Guardian or hope you get a Rift Guardian that spawns lots of adds. Because of the way the Blood-Tide Blade works, 400% increased damage for every enemy within 25 yards. It is now capped at 10 enemies, so that's a 4,000% modifier, but obviously 4,000%, that's absolutely huge. You're always going to take the Funerary pick, because this again is giving us 300% damage. It's giving us double this if we're only attacking at single target Rift Guardian, and we also always take the Iron Rose because it's going to give us the Siphon Blood. But Mantle of Channeling, Orgilds and Ring of Royal Grandeur, these could come off. A Necromancer, and this is not just for Nova, this is applicable to everything. The Necromancer's got some really good modifiers that could go in there. So Nova is a secondary skill, so a 400% damage modifier would be obviously absolutely huge. We can get a Rylina's Shadow Hook, 0.5% for every point of max essence. You can get this up over 300 essence, that's like 150, 160 upwards modifier. Nair's Black Death, 100% damage increase for every poison skill. You can take 3 or 4 poison skills. Theoretically you can make some kind of build with 6 poison skills for 600%. So ultimately most of these modifiers can work into pretty much anything. You've also got the Tragul's Corroded Fang, 200% increased damage provided you're putting a curse on an enemy. So ultimately damage for Necro is going to go through the absolute roof. So Nova on Tragul's, Nova on Anarius, Nova also on Legacy of Dreams is just going to have a huge damage buff, because in here on the cube at the bottom you're going to have 3 multiplicative damage modifiers. So getting a 150 done on Necro, I think it is going to be very easy. It's the same for the Bone Spear, because on the Bone Spear build, let's just load that up, we end up taking modifiers that buff up the Bone Spear, and you don't really have any room for anything else. So you take the Maltorius Petrified Spike, you take the Scythe of the Cycle, you take the Gelmandor's Marrow Braces. Again, they can go onto the character, the Rogue can come out, and then we can basically pick a couple of those modifiers that we talked about, whether it's Nares, whether it's the Tragul's Corroded Fang and you're having to work a curse into the bar with here the Decrepify, and whether it's the Shadow Hook. Doesn't matter, you're just going to get a lot of damage. So Necromancer is a really, really big winner. Even the starting set, Bones of Rathma, admittedly, this is one of the ones where it is going to be quite hard to fit in much utility here, because you're generally going to take the Crimsons for the cooldown reduction. That means that you're going to have to take your Rogue, you're always going to want to take a Crispins. But as you're building this out, because it's a starting set, the main thing you need to do for a Rathma build is reset your Army of the Dead. So cooldown reduction is very important, and it means that you can take Ingeum and you can take Messerschmitt's Reaver. You know, both of those things offer tremendous cooldown reduction for us. So the Messerschmitt's gives us a 1 second off all the skills when we kill something. You know, just picks a skill at random, takes 1 second off it. And then the Ingeum gives us the 10 seconds just off everything for 15 seconds. So again, you can have 2 cooldown things, you can get a couple of weapons, dealing out some damage. So even I think even Rathma potentially gets affected. Now whether the push version does or not, because you do need the other supporting items, not quite so sure on that. Interestingly, I think we could end up with you know, Lord Nova being very strong, because again, instead of having this Witching Hour, you would have the dainties on the character. You might want to take out the Convention of Elements, because you'll have a better, just more consistent damage modifier. So again, you could have 2 more modifiers here with Crispins on the character. Corpse Explosion, again, similar story. You can take all the Corpse Explosion modifiers and then jam the cube with extra. So basically what I'm getting at is Necro, the weapons are just so powerful. They all add a tremendous amount of damage. So any Necro build you play next season, chances are you're going to make use of the cube being open, and certainly for speed content as well. Sometimes with Nova, as an example, it does go quite well, but it's quite slow at speeds. You can now pick an Ingeum and some modifiers, and then that way you can teleport infinitely. So I think there's a lot of cool things to do for Necro. Necromancer is going to be a really excellent choice for next season. Next up, I think benefiting the second most for the season theme is actually going to be the Wizard. There's quite a few interesting combinations here. The main one that I think that's interesting is potentially the Twister one, because you can take the Valthek's Rebuke for 400% increased twisted damage, putting it in a straight path. You can take the 150% increased damage from the Twister Sword. You can also then take the Etched Sigil, which increases energy twister whilst you're doing Disintegrate or Arcane Torrent or whatever. And you can also take Death Wish for 325% damage whenever you're channeling, again, Arcane Torrent, Disintegrate or whatever. So that means that there's 4 modifiers that you can jam in for your Twister on the basically of the weapon slot alone. Of course, Twisters does also have the Braces, Rancer's Folly. So these again also give it another modifier. So I think all those things going together could be quite impactful and could be an awful lot of fun. Another wizard skill I think that could well benefit from this tremendously is going to be Frozen Orb, because on the weapon slot, if we look at the Unstable Scepter, this gives us a 450% mod and an additional explosion on the Arcane Orb. We can have a Wizard Spike, which means that when we attack, we've got a 25% chance of throwing a Frozen Orb. And then Triumvirate, you normally take this, your signature spells increase up to 400%. Well, we might well again also be able to work in the Death Wish. Whilst we're channeling, we might be able to just automatically throw out the Frozen Orbs with this 325% damage modifier on it. So again, that's something that could come into it. Again, this could maybe be mixed with Hydras. So again, we can take Fragment of Destiny, we can maybe take Death Wish, we can take the Serpent Sparker. There's lots of these different combinations I think that we can do. There's also quite a lot of orbs that are interesting for the wizard. So things like the Orb of Infinite Depth, again, adds damage, you know, up to 40% damage. It also adds a ton of damage reduction, which is really good. Talrash's is the starting set. I think there's going to be interesting ways of maybe taking a rogue on the character, maybe matching Crimsons, Orgilds and Squirts. Again, with a lot of the speed builds for Wizard, Ingame can be nice, but generally speaking, you're looking to put an Aether Walker in there for lots of free teleports. It only then it's no cooldown, but it costs arcane power. So you sometimes have to drop a modifier to take the Aether Walker. So a good example would be on the Meteor build. We have to take the two main weapons that we want to do, which is the Smouldering Core and the Grand Vizier. You normally just take the Grand Vizier and you ditch the Smouldering Core because you want the utility of the Aether Walker. But now with the cube being open, you can work this in. You can get the extra 50% stacking up to 150% damage. Might help you out, put those elites down a little better. You might simply decide, well, actually I'm going to take a Squirts for 100% damage, work on my shields. There's going to be quite a few interesting things, I think, to do on Wizard one way or the other. Now, of course, it's not going to affect every build equally on Wizard. I think there are going to be some that are not going to be particularly impacted. So if we look at Firebird's Finery as an example, I think it's probably a little hard to work this in here because again, you're going to take the Death Wish just as standard in that build, so I'm not sure there's terribly much more advantage other than taking what we've got here, which is the Rogue with the Orgilds, with the Crimsons, with the Orb of Infinite Depth. But again, you know, there might well be possibilities. Veers, I'm not sure whether this actually is going to impact terribly much. Interestingly, we do have the Wizard Spike in here. Again, Veers not an amazing build, but maybe someone can do something with it. The Frozen Orb on the DMO, again, perhaps we can work something in here. You know, maybe we decide to swap some of these items around. Again, the set builds do make it harder. It is probably the no set builds, I think, where we are going to see a lot of variability in the cube. Typhon's Veil, again, this has got modifiers because there is the Winter Flurry source, which gives us a bit more damage as well as the Magistrate, the Orb of Infinite Depth, Serpent Sparker. So again, I think there will be some kind of combinations. Wizard ultimately does have some good options. So again, I think pretty fun, probably fairly strong for the season for the Wizard. I think the class that probably gets another high amount of utility out of the open cube is probably the Witch Doctor. So something like Spirit Barrage, where you're taking the Barber, you're taking your Shukranis, you're taking your Gazing Demise. You could well end up wanting to work in something like a Sacred Harvester, because this will just allow us to stack up Soul Harvest for that extra intelligence and damage bump. We might well be stacking something like a Vu's Juicer, getting extra rune on Spirit Barrage. There are quite a few combinations, I think. Again, looking at the zombie build, the zombie charges carry extra damage. You might well want to work in Sacred Harvester. You might well want to work in your Shukrani's Triumph, again on the zombie build, which is, you know, a fairly strong build for the Witch Doctor. So that again will offer quite a few increases in damage. Similarly for the Dagger of Darts, you might well then be able to take Sacred Harvester as well, and the Shukranis. I think there's going to be quite a few things to do with the Witch Doctor. Another good utility item is Wormwood. Locust Swarm constantly, you know, activates around you. That means you get really good uptime on your Ring of Emptiness for 300% extra damage. Will make a lot of builds quite lazy and quite easy to play. So again, I do think there's going to be quite a few interesting combinations, because ultimately there are some offhands that do, you know, damage. There are weapons that do damage. There's going to be some stuff, I think, in here that you can mix and match and have a little bit of a play around with, and again probably add some sort of power to a particular Witch Doctor build. Again, some of them won't benefit from them. Another good one, Echoing Fury. Like this, of course, you can use on lots of different classes, but some of the Witch Doctor builds scale really well with attack speed. So, you know, going back to the Dagger of Darts, it's normally Echoing Fury and the Poison one, but we can then add Sacred Harvester in for extra damage, extra toughness. I do think there's going to be some interesting combinations. So that those three classes, the Necro, the Wizard, the Witch Doctor, I think are the big winners. And now we kind of move on to things that are not doing particularly well out of this season theme. So another class that potentially benefits quite a bit from the cube is the Crusader. I've put it in the maybe it doesn't kind of category, because I do think it's going to be a little bit fiddly to get this in. But we do have the Norvald set for the Crusader. Whenever we use Steed Charge, we get 200% increased damage, and for 5 seconds afterwards. Of Of course, this is paired with the Aegis of Valor set normally. One interesting thing I think is we could maybe take the Rogue out of the cube, pop it on the character instead of the Stone of Jordan, and then have a little play with something like the Echoing Fury, which gives us 75% attack speed and some move speed. Now, of course, we know attack speed scales really well with this build. It a little bit might be like having a permanent speed pylon, because the attack speed will be crazy high. So that's something that we could potentially have a look at with the Aegis of Valor. So that might well actually not feel too much of a power loss from the soul shards if that does kind of play out to be particularly impactful. But there's no avoids 200% damage. Because it takes up 2 slots here, it means that you can only then get 1 kind of modifier in the cube in the weapon slot. But if the cube is open, then you could actually have 2 or 3. So something like Aegis of Valor, but on the actual Heaven's Fury rather than the Fist of Heavens, might well work out, because we'll be able to take the supporting items, which are the Fate of the Fell. So the Heaven's Fury, 2 additional rays and 500% damage. And then you can then take the shield that goes with it, so the Shield of Fury, and that might well increase up your damage. Now, unfortunately, there's not really many sets that have got a general damage modifier on them for the Crusader. So you would think perhaps maybe Condemn, because you can squeeze in the Blade of Prophecy, you can get the Friar's Wrath Shield and get the Condemn modifiers. Obviously, Condemn is now played with the Khan on the Phalanx build, so then you have to fit in all the Phalanx stuff, where you need the shield that goes with it, the Unrelenting Phalanx, casting it twice. You kind of need the Warhelm of Kassar. So there's a lot of things really in that build that just have to go in. So I'm not entirely sure you're going to be able to work in something like Condemn, but Heaven's Fury might be a possibility. This was always a kind of a squishy build, and increasing the damage. I think that might be where we run into a little bit of problems next season, as in anything that does benefit from the cube damage wise might well just run into toughness problems, where we will kind of have to see. Again, Legacy of Dreams builds, Bombardment, Captain America, most of the Crusader builds do just have the kind of 3 modifiers, and there's no real general modifier that we can pick from the weapon slot that just helps us out. Like the Norval set, obviously you can't use with Legacy of Dreams, and I can't really think of too much else in here that's just going to give you like generally extra damage. There might well be something that comes about across the course of the season. There are some interesting things you can do with cooldown, like the Swift mount for the double duration on the Steed charge. There's things you can do with like the Akarat's Awakening shield. Every block gives cooldown. You can take a Khan's Addendum. There might well be some utility to be had here in some combination of weapons and shields, but ultimately I just don't really see a particularly massive impact, save for obviously the Echoing Fury with the probably one of the easiest and best speed builds in the game. So that is something I'm looking forward to trying, but it's not like Captain America, we're missing out a Grafalcon's Foot, and if we pick something else then we get a load more damage with it as well. So again, maybe there's something that I'm not considering here, but I just don't think it's going to be particularly impactful for the Crusader. And now we come to the Demon Hunter. I can't really think of too many builds. In fact, I can't think of any builds, again, that have got access to a modifier that we can't use due to there not being space in the cube. There are some utility options, particularly Gears of Dreadlands. We do have a lot of combinations. We're looking to take a Dawn, a Fortress Ballista, a Siri Satchel. You might want to take a Yang's Recurve just for the like crazy high resource cost reduction, so you could put all of those in now. Valor's Bequest, sometimes you take that to increase the number of projectile piercings, so you can really kind of mix and match your stuff. You could take Ingerm for cooldown reduction. Again, these are kind of like utility options. There is the Odyssey's End, so Entangling Shot will give 150% damage modifier. This is of course the ability that the ZDH relies on to buff up damage in the group. So it might well be that somehow we can shoehorn this into some of the builds, but again, there's a lot of reliance on the Crimson set, on the Orguild set for the extra power, and ultimately we're going to have to change your skills to get this done. Demon Hunter, I think, probably gets the least amount of this, because again, looking at all the builds across the Demon Hunter, I can't think of anything massively overly easy to put in. it might well be that Odyssey's End is the way to go, and that when we get onto the live season, there is some way of shoehorning in Entangling Shot into a couple of builds that really, take it up those, 4 or 5 tiers with this 150% extra damage. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Again, we'll kind of have to see. Legacy of Dreams, unfortunately, really sucks on Demon Hunter. The best build is the Rapid Fire, and it just isn't very good. So, again, there isn't another multiplier that I can think to add, and I just don't really see Demon Hunter having a massively good time of it. Of course, the starting set is the UE. Again, I think Echoing Fury could be something interesting to take with multi-shot. You're normally choosing between that and Adorn on that build. With the cubing open, you can try and pick both of them. So Torment 16 on multi-shot could be loads of fun. That could be a really good one to do. But again, not a massive amount of choice here in terms of modifiers. There's lots of little utility things like Calamity, casting Mark of Death. That's fine, that could be a bit more damage. The shield and Fortress Ballista could be usable in a bunch of builds to help keep up a Squirt's Necklace damage bonus. Again, I'm not really seeing anything that's jumping out to me unless we are working in Odyssey's End. So again, we'll kind of have to see how that pans out. So potentially some use here with this, but overall I'm not entirely convinced. And now we come to Monk. Now Monk, again, I don't really think there's going to be terribly much in here. Most of the builds revolve around 3 modifiers and 3 modifiers only. What I would say though is Wave of Light for speeds on Legacy of Dreams is probably going to be much better than it used to be, because again, you had to choose between the Ingame. You normally have to take the Temple, Incense Torch, the Grand Temple in the cube. You have to take the Rabid Strike. You have to take your Kirashiro's Blade as well. Let's see, where is Kirashiro's? Yeah, just under the Ingame. You have to basically pick one of them to drop if you want to take an Ingame and do your Infinite Teleport. But if the cube is open, then that is obviously much easier. It's going to be easy to play on Legacy of Dreams because you're not trying to, again, you're not relying on sets like Guardians and Rogues and all that kind of stuff. So I think for speed farming, it is going to be quite nice. In terms of actual increasing the damage of anything, again, there's no general modifier for the Monk. There's nothing that just adds like 200-300% damage. I can't think of anything massively that jumps out to me that is going to increase some damage. Now, it might well be that something like Uliana's, there's Lion's Claw, there's the Fist of Az, there's the staff that reduces the cooldown on 7-sided strike. Maybe there's going to be something you can do with something at some point, but ultimately what I would say is it potentially does open up some utility options for like the Infinite Teleport Bounty Monk, because the Rogue can go on the character and then you can basically take your Frostburn gloves and your bindings and your Cruder's boots. There are a decent amount of modifiers in the armor slot, so it might well be actually that on Monk we're doubling up on some armor. Again, cooldown can be very nice for the Monk for some of its abilities, so Ingame, and then you can actually then still pair that with Messerschmitt's Reaver. If you wanted to go really super hard on the cooldown reduction with that, take a Zodiac Ring as well. So again, there are some options, but ultimately I don't really see where there's like a screaming amount of power coming out of it, and ultimately the Soul Shards going is going to hurt the Monk quite a bit, because obviously they are just so powerful, and without there being anything corresponding in here to go, oh well, I'm just going to take this item and that item and bump it up 3 or 4 tiers, then I do think it is going to be a little bit of a kind of sad time for them. It's still going to be dead strong, Inner Monk's fast, it's fun, but ultimately in terms of use out of the season theme, I don't see terribly much here. And so we come to the Barb, which I think probably is the class that gets the least out of the season theme. Again, there is nothing that I can think of for any of the builds that adds a particularly decent amount of power. There's no modifiers left on the table that I can kind of see looking through the various suits and the various builds. So we're back onto a little bit of utility. Perhaps you can work Ingame easier. You can work in Messerschmitt's Reaver. Focus and Restraint's quite popular for Barb. It adds a lot of power. Band of Might is mandatory because of the toughness, so that jewelry slot is always going to be locked off, either in the cube or on the character. All of the builds kind of have like one modifier, and then a lot of them don't even take another modifier in the other weapon slot. They take something like they take an Echoing Fury or an Azarath, something like that for like cold damage. Maybe Whirlwind with Ambos. There's maybe some utility that you can take Ambos, and you can take Echoing Fury, and you can take the Ingeum, and you can take the Messerschmitts, so on and so forth. But again, Barb relies quite heavily on cooldown because a lot of the builds revolve around getting as much uptime on Wrath of the Berserker as you can for the toughness, for the extra damage. And with that in mind, Crimson's is very popular, and ultimately that means that it does become quite difficult to use the open cubes. I really, honestly, I don't even think the Legacy of Dreams is going to benefit massively from this. Let's just have a look and load that up. So if we look at the Hota Barb, it's pretty much already stacked with all the modifiers that you would want. Again, there's nothing really that I think you would want to take out. You need the Zodiac to reset the Wrath of the Berserker. Maybe the Bandamite could go on the character, and you might take the Furnace for the extra elite damage or something like that. But again, ultimately, I'm not sure there's a massive amount here for the Barbarian, and trying to get Raycore to work without the Crimsons is going to be pretty difficult. So, and again, there's the 2 spears, the 2 modifiers, and nothing else that we're missing out on, I don't think. Again, maybe for some speed, you can slap an Ingeum in here, and then that would help you with infinite, charging about. So there will be some little bits that you can do, but ultimately, I think the Barb is probably the class that this impacts the least. So, summing things up, big winner Necromancer, clear power on all the modifiers. Next is Wizard. I think there will be a few builds that you can change, some utility, lots of different weapons you can mix around. Witch Doctor similarly, I think there will be a few tweaks here and there to a few things that you can do, probably a little bit more fun. Then in the kind of not so great category, you've got the Crusader and the Demon Hunter, potentially with some speed builds being affected with including Echoing Fury. Norvald set, can you shoehorn that in for the Crusader? Odyssey's End, can you shoehorn that in for the Demon Hunter? And then kind of in the last place, Monk and Barb, where I just don't really see much going on. Monk probably has more utility than Barb. I think some of the speed builds benefit from having an Ingeum, and Barb ultimately I just don't really see very much. Now, I did say there is a potential solution to this, and this is one of the downsides, I think, of not actually having a PTR and a test realm for this anymore, would probably be to combine this season with the free Ring of Royal Grandeur season, because that would then mean that the Rogue could come out of the jewellery slot for every single build in the game that relies on Crimsons, all guilds, blah blah blah, and that would give you one open cube slot to pick something of interest. It would still be wonky as hell, because obviously Barb, Monk, there's nothing really adding damage. Demon Hunter, Crusader, it's kind of hard to fit those 2 items in. And Necro, again, Wizard would still be the main beneficiaries of it. But that's just how this game is designed. There are some classes that have got modifiers left on the table, and there are some that do not. And with that, the open cube, the 4th cube, it's always going to be wonky, because it's not like every class benefits from that 4th extra modifier slot. But I think a free Rogue gem, free Rogue would help. Legacy of Dreams gem, you could give that for free as well with the season, and then give Legacy of Dreams builds, buff, they can take an extra legendary gem them. So I think the combining of those 3 season themes, so open cube, free Lord gem, free Rogue, could be a more fun season. It would actually add power, I think, to every single class build in the game, which is kind of what we want really for a season theme. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Obviously, I'm going to try and do as much testing as I can on the season. It's going to be pretty frenetic, trying to get all the items for every build. Stay tuned for more videos. Let me know if you think there's anything I overlooked. I'm sure there might well be a couple of really good build options that I haven't quite considered. So yeah, let me know. I'll see you in season 31. Take it easy, guys. Peace.